So, Matt, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you back. How's things been?
Miserable. I'm a congressional reporter. So actually, Congress has been gone the past couple weeks. So I've been able to submit my receipts for covering the RNC 3-4 weeks ago. These days and weeks and months all bleed together.
Absolutely, man. They're flying by, and I guess there's a lot to cover on the Hill outside of the UAP subject. So I imagine it's a bit crazy right now.
To a degree, this is the shitty thing about the U.S. Congress. They're always busy and frantic, but kind of doing nothing. Last I checked, this Congress is on par to be the least productive in U.S. history. And when conservatives kind of pushed back on me for that, hey, maybe that's what we want, I was like, no, you guys aren't even unwinding the administrative state like you want. You're not cutting the budget like you want. So you're not doing away with regulations. No, you guys are just a terrible Congress. I say this Congress is terrible at congressing. But no, because in the House, Republicans were so jammed up and having internal battles over either abortion or funding levels, GOP leadership just scrapped their plan to actually deal with government funding bills, and they extended, so they get all of August off each year. They extended that August recess by a week on the front side of it. They're not back until the second week of September. So literally, U.S. Congress, between now and November, they're only going to be here in session 3 weeks. And that means 3 days for 3 weeks, because that's what they do. They fly in Tuesday and they're out by Thursday. This Congress is terrible. So all Americans listening, vote all the bums out. That's what I say.
Well, I mean, you've covered some of the, you've got some great quotes in the past few weeks and months that I'd love to go over and kind of expand upon. But my first question would be, I want you to tell me if you know anything about the UAP caucus actually trying to hire David Grusch.
So we did. It's interesting. At askapol.com, our latest interview on that would be with Eric Burleson, Republican from Missouri. He was the one who kind of first alerted us to it. And what he says now is they've looked into it without them having a select UAP committee, which would have its own budget. What they would have to do, and they could do this, any of these members on the UAP caucus could hire Grusch, but each office basically has the same limited budget. More than half, probably six, I don't know. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that budget covers all their expenses for the year and staffers. And if you're a California member, you get a little bigger budget than if you're a Tennessee lawmaker like Burchett, or Missouri like Burleson. And so within that, and remember, all these members of the UAP caucus, they're also on other committees. And even the oversight committee that a lot of them are on, what does the oversight committee deal with? Everything, basically. They've been dealing with the head of the Secret Service. They pushed her out. Cheadle, bipartisan hearing, one of the last ones and first ones, actually, of this Congress. But that committee also was dealing with the Biden impeachment. That committee is where David Grusch testified, last July. And so just that committee alone has a huge purview. And so they have to be very strategic with the staffers they get. But again, that's one committee. So they might also serve on the education committee, or they might also serve on armed services. Well, if you're on armed services, you're going to want a veteran or someone with a master's degree, et cetera, in those issues, which honestly, it's that could be Grusch. But so most of the members of the UAP caucus, this is me playing devil's advocate, but on their behalf. So maybe I'm playing angel's advocate. Because I'm a little more cynical than I'm coming across right now. But so if they hired him, what Burleson was saying is we don't really know where he would go, and it would have to come from one of their personal offices, and that would just eat up a lot of that budget, where right now they abuse their staffers on Capitol Hill. So like they call it an LA or a legislative assistant. Each LA probably has 3 to like 6 issues on their plate. Like some of them, you talk to these guys and they're like, yeah, I work on armed services and, transportation issues. Like, what? What does armed services have to do with transportation? But because, like, and pardon me, but in the Senate, boom, they've got a lot more money and they've got more experts on their staffs. So, yeah, again, with the House, it sounds like UAP caucus still interested in hiring Grusch, but because at least at the start of this 118th Congress, all their budget was like already allocated. And that's where like they get a smart money person to be there to run their office. And literally the first thing they do is just do a spreadsheet for the entire 2 years of the Congress. And so it'll be interesting at the start of the next Congress, in January, to see if one of them, loses a top staffer and, is able to, have a spot open up on their team. So yeah, I'll be watching that. But the members, I imagine after the election, they will start pushing a little bit more for a select UAP committee. If they get that, which is like a whole nother conversation, a hope and a prayer. But if they got that, then they do want to take some of that budget for that select UAP committee and hire Grusch. But this is ages in the future, so we will see.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else, Eric Burleson, and this is an exclusive that you got through Askapol, is that he said that AARO had told Congressional UAP caucus there's nothing top secret about extraterrestrial UFOs. It's the detection technologies that are classified. Tell us how that came about. What happened there?
Dude, isn't that interesting? That's one where I don't 100% get my mind around it. But like what, at Askapol, we've sat outside of all these like skiff briefings where initially the first one, it was just us at Askapol, so me, and then News Nation, our friends over there. But like the last skiff briefing, or maybe the second to last one, that one you had CNN, Fox, Washington Post, Axios, The Hill. So you had a lot more interest. And so it's been interesting because most other outlets, aren't continuing to pull the threads, but we are at Askapol. And so when members first come out of that skiff classified briefing, like take Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think she's got like 13 million followers on X or Twitter or whatever, millions on Instagram. She's like photogenic, loves talking to cameras, blah, blah, blah. When she comes and have a good relationship with her. When I was a correspondent at Vice News, the joke was I was the squad correspondent for Vice. So like AOC knows me well. When AOC, who's talkative, when she comes out of the skiff, and she's been in a couple of these briefings on UAPs, her rule is no, I don't say a thing. And I'll ask her even like a gentle softball, and she'll be like, no, I'm just not talking. And that's so wise because this is media professor Laslo. I teach at Johns Hopkins a little bit. And that's just a wise strategy because when they go into the skiff, they all have to sign away their life. So literally, if they disclose what they learn inside, they could be jailed, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I've done with AOC and others, which you can find at askapolo.com, I'll like wait 2 weeks and I won't ask directly about the skiff briefing, but I'll ask some of the questions. I'll ask some questions based off of what I heard from other members leaving the skiff. And when you don't say skiff, then she'll like talk about it tangentially. And like AOC, to stick with her example, she comes at this issue from the military industrial complex angle. She's interested in the contracting aspect and all that secrecy and all that power that America's military industrial complex flexes regularly on our representatives. And so I don't know if Burleson because there's been a couple times where I'm pretty sure he's let some classified info slip out. Possibly because I'm a pro at interviewing, but I've got sources. So sometimes I will ask them classified stuff, but not, I won't couch it in, hey, I'm now going to ask you about this classified briefing. No. I let that be the furthest thing from their mind. And I just talk to them as if I know what they know. And then they start talking. And so this is one where it was interesting because Burleson was like a kind of defensive, because after he left the skiff briefing, maybe in the spring, he kind of came across as a little bit of a AARO fanboy in our exclusive with him. And so, he came out of that. I forget the exact quote, but he basically came out saying like, yeah, I've been convinced, like they effectively and, in a way that he believed showed and debunked a lot of these videos that we've seen. Senator Gillibrand over in the Senate, she told us at Ask a Poll that she wants to hold a public Senate hearing either in July, which that's now bye-bye, or September. And so I wasn't able to catch up with her in the last weeks of Congress. But if we all hold her to her word, there's going to be a UAP hearing in the Senate in September. Again, if we hold her to her word and if she lives up to her own word. But what she wants that hearing to be in the Senate is she wants to have Kirkpatrick's replacement at AARO come in and, explain to the American people, explain to your audience and ours that, and have AARO go through and show. And she said, like, some of the videos that we would know. I'm not sure if that's the Tic Tac video or some of the other ones, but she says she's been convinced that no, those aren't UAPs by something that AARO did. And it sounds like Burleson was also convinced. So what Gillibrand wants that Senate hearing to do is explain to all of us, the American people, how AARO has been able to claim that no, these are no longer UAPs. We have identified, this is the metrics we used, and we know what this thing is, or we know what contracting firm this came from, et cetera, et cetera. She also wants part of that hearing. I don't know in her mind whether it's a quarter or a third or half. It seems like it's more a quarter or a tenth, but she wants them to also explain the stuff that they don't know. Because with all these UFO skeptics, they always point to AARO and be like, look, they've identified 80% of these. And I'm like, cool. No one gives a shit about that 80%. Right? Like, we're focused on the other 20 or 10 or 25 or 50%, And so that's where I'm really intrigued on what Gillibrand is able to get AARO to present publicly if that hearing does happen in the Senate. But so now back to your question. So Burleson came out of that skiff seeming like an AARO fanboy. And, our audience at Ask a Poll ripped him a new one. Obviously, UFO Reddit was not having that. And so I just hadn't talked to him for a month or two. So when I saw him right ahead of the congressional recess, he had a lot of stuff that he wanted to tell me, because when he talks to me, he's talking to all of you. And so he had a message for the community, kind of like explaining himself a little further. And he was like, yeah, I'm not convinced by AARO, but he's like, they showed me convincing things for that 70 or 80% that they, claim to know. But he's like, I still have questions. And he said, the part that you asked me about, which is, I think, classified, but that's where my mind's blown, because he said what AARO told them is they can basically be public about any of this stuff. Like, the only, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it seems like you've seen this interview. I haven't looked at it, since we posted it, but I'm pretty sure he was saying that what AARO told him is all the sensors and all the technology that AARO or the Department of Defense or possibly Department of Energy, all the technology that is being used to detect these UAPs, that's classified. And so there's an interesting distinction in there, because even I'm a little thrown off by it, because if you look at askapol.com, I think it was in March, maybe April, but we had an exclusive with Gillibrand. She had just gotten back from a fundraising tour out west, but a working fundraising tour. So before she went to Cali to really shake down Hollywood for their Skrilla, she stopped in Nevada. And remember, she's one of only 6 members of the Senate who's on both the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee. So she comes at this from interesting angles. And so when she was out there, she had, and someone, maybe it was Dean Johnson, but someone found on her public schedule that, she had meetings with the Air Force out there, Northrop Grumman, I believe, and Lockheed Martin. 3 separate meetings, but all 3 classified, which to me stands out. So, because classified briefing with a private company who's a military contractor, like, part of me is like, fuck that. Why should that be classified? They're not even a part of the government. Except these days they are, because the military industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned about, I believe, has now been realized. And now the contracting corps and the Pentagon are just woven together in inseparable ways, which is another conversation altogether. But so Gillibrand, when she was out there, she was the first to really complain to us at Askapol about this persistent problem of UAPs hovering over sensitive military and nuclear sites. And she was like, this is a persistent problem. So what she was fighting for in this year's NDAA was more sensors. So I'm like, wait, Burleson says the technology, and she didn't get into the specifics, but she was saying the way our radars or whatever are set up, there's certain, what would it be? There's just certain spots that our radars aren't trained on per se. And so we're missing stuff in the atmosphere. And it's kind of terrifying if you think about it, because what she's saying is, hey, there is stuff over our sensitive military and nuclear sites that, for one, we do not know what they are. So they are technically UAPs. But also, it's a persistent problem. And they're just there. And we don't have a way to, one, see them, which to me is wild. I'm like, if you see one of these, we got so many missiles with that can track anything and potentially anything, they're supposed to. That's what Northrop Grumman and Lockheed promise us when we spend our billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, on this stuff. And so that's what I'm curious, her fighting for new sensors. Because, again, you think about the other members of Congress, the more skeptics, like a Jim Himes or whatever, they say, no, there's no problem. Well, no, so Senator Gillibrand is saying the Air Force and these contractors are saying we don't know what the heck is above our military bases. What she told us there has since this year been backed up by Senator Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's vice presidential running mate. He complained about this problem in an open hearing with top Pentagon officials. I believe it was the head of Northcom and Southcom. And there was only some of it he could ask about publicly, and then the other stuff he asked about in the private classified session. But his complaint was this problem over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, which is more suburban. And then when I circled back with Kaine, which you can, again, find this at askapol.com, Kaine was like, yeah, what we haven't talked about and what the military doesn't know is rules for engagement in suburban or populated areas. So I'm like, wait, that's kind of wild. So you're backing up what Gillibrand said. Then we also had eternal UFO skeptic Mark Kelly, astronaut, Arizona senator. He, I think maybe to the head of, anyway, top Pentagon official in front of his committee, and he asked about, so he does not believe in UAPs. He does not believe in UFOs. He laughs it off and says, no, we're all idiots, blah, blah, blah. This is interesting. So he brought up the same problem. And technically, sir, you were bringing up the problem of UAPs because the military didn't know what the heck they were. And you, as a sitting senator or astronaut, you don't know what the heck they are. So, yeah, that's why we have the term UFO turned UAP. Well, so he brought up the problem. Senator Rounds has brought up the problem. South Dakota Republican. And so that's where it was interesting, especially with Kelly. He again brought up this problem. For him, he's like, no, UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial, like that doesn't exist. He writes it off. So what he is convinced of is that these are America's foreign adversaries flying what he calls drones over America's sensitive, and for him in Arizona, it was Luke Air Force Base. But sensitive military site. Like in Langley, they had to move an entire fighter wing because of the drone problem. They literally shut down the tech, so they had to move all these American fighter jets had to be moved because of some problem overhead that Pentagon with their near $1 trillion freaking budget doesn't know what the heck it is. And so that's fascinating to me with Senator Kelly, him saying he would rather, instead of entertaining the idea of UAPs or UFOs or anything extraterrestrial, he is convinced that America's foreign adversaries are regularly flying above American military and nuclear sites. Can we stop the presses right there? If America is invaded persistently by our adversaries, as Gillibrand, as Kelly contends, but if Kelly's right, then that's what Gillibrand saw and what they're seeing in Nevada. So persistent problem. That's what Kane and his people are seeing in Virginia. Rounds and his people in the Northwest, or him in the Midwest. So this is again why I keep pressing these lawmakers on it, because I'm like, wait, take your thoughts to the ultimate conclusion. And with Kelly, he's like, yeah, these are probably foreign spies who are going and buying drones off the shelf and then surveilling our military sites. Well, so if that's the case, why haven't you all shot 1 or 2 or 10 of them down, like Kane was describing over a suburban area? So out there in Arizona, if that's the problem, well, why haven't we recovered 1 to 10 or 20 of these? If it's a drone bought over the shelf, we don't need the new sensors that Gillibrand's fighting for. And so that's where I'm trying to connect all the dots with their illogic. But yeah, it becomes this wild tapestry. And so that's where Burleson, back to your question, kind of gave us all a glimpse into the UAP politics, or maybe even the classification politics of this. And so it's interesting that he says AARO is only protecting, basically what he's saying, if I'm reading him right, is that AARO's mandate is to protect American secrets, and American secrets are the technology we use to see the skies. But now I'm like, wait, you guys let a fucking balloon from China go from Montana to South Carolina over U.S. airspace, and you still trust this Pentagon? Guys, they let a balloon invade our airspace. Fuck that. They literally have about $1 trillion a year budget. They're all fat and happy, but we got invaded by a balloon? Oh, and then remember, then after that, the Air Force quickly shoots down 3 objects, 3 different spots. The reason the Air Force stopped shooting down those objects or UAPs wasn't because they stopped being there. They stopped shooting them down because the American public got freaked out. they called their lawmakers. Lawmakers demanded another classified briefing after they already had the first the Chinese balloon briefing. And so the Air Force's response wasn't to solve the problem and get the stuff out of American airspace. The problem was to just stop shooting it down and to stop drawing attention to the problem. And so it's just wild. And so to now hear that it's just the sensors that are classified, it's like, wait, our shitty sensors are classified? Because Gillibrand's saying those sensors don't work and that we need new sensors. So, yeah, I think someone's spinning some yarn here.
It definitely sounds like that for sure. And you mentioned in there about the Senate hearing, and that would be fantastic, obviously. But we've also heard that there may be a House hearing in fall led by a new female chair. This comes from Anna Paulina Luna, and she apparently has already previewed contents of the hearing, and it's regarding USOs, underwater objects. What can you say on that?
We're going to get all Finding Nemo on their asses. Great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Tearjerker. But so, yeah, that's an interesting one because it felt kind of like the House was kicking the can. I know many of our subscribers at Ask a Poll still believe, probably in a very informed way, they believe that they're going to keep kicking the can, until past the election. But we'll see, because our latest interview with Moskowitz, he said this is the number one issue he's being asked about on the trail. And he said that in the context of, like, right before Kamala Harris became the nominee for the Democrats, when, Joe Biden and his health was sucking all the air out of the nation, basically, he said people would ask him about UAPs. Then, after former President Trump, with an assassination attempt on his life, which, like, to me is just still so wild how big of a fuck up the Secret Service did in allowing that. He said instead of his constituents coming up and asking about that, which is just historic, tragic folly, because, yeah, a man lost his life. Don't forget, in 3 seconds, he got off 8 shots with his AR-15, because that's American gun laws. He gets 8 shots, Secret Service got 1. Luckily, they killed the motherfucker with 1. But, yeah, that's why American gun laws are crazy. Because, yeah, even when you got the Secret Service and local and state police, someone can still get off 8 shots and take a life and maim 3 people. But so, again, Moskowitz, in that context, right after that, he's like, yeah, people are asking me, top question is UAPs. And so that's where lawmakers have been feeling that pressure from the Ask a Poll community, from your subscribers, UAP, UFO, Reddit. Like, I know it often feels hopeless, fam, but keep at it. It seems like the pressure campaign is working. Even ones who laugh y'all off still at least have to sit down and now, like, wrestle with these questions and look in the mirror, because Senator Kelly, like eternal UFO skeptic, he's now convinced, and is he fine with it, that America's invaded daily by foreign adversaries? Because, like, literally, Senator, if that's your claim, stop the presses. Like, come on. And so we'll see. The House, they vacillated a little bit more. Gillibrand came out a little more, like, strong. Yeah, it's going to be July or September. And then July blew past. So she might just talk a big game. Now we'll see whether we actually see it in September. In the House, people in the community were growing very skeptical, and they just didn't have answers whenever I would talk to them once a week. Burchett, especially once a week. Luna, whenever I see her, which is about once a week. And she said now pretty definitively that, because she already confirmed to us at Ask a Poll that USOs was going to be the focus of the next hearing. Not the total focus. It seems like it'll be, and I might be wrong on this, but it seems like it'll be 50, 60% maybe of it. Because I know other members have other questions they want answered beyond USOs. And so I think within the UAP caucus, you're having debate. And actually, I'm telling this to your audience for the first time. A member of the UAP caucus did ask me to pass on the names of potentially good witnesses for them to have in their next public hearing, which this is why congressional recess is needed, because I totally forgot that for like the past month or two. And I'm actually writing it down. Because, yeah, what witnesses? And so that, again, so yeah, having a member of Congress ask a reporter, and like, I didn't answer. I'm like, look at my Twitter feed. Bring in those people as witnesses, especially the quiet ones. The quiet ones usually know the most. But it's interesting because, these members have had briefings from Lou Alessandro, who's got his book coming out. And so they know those folks. Graves already came in. And they've been hearing from other whistleblowers who are literally telling Congress, we don't trust AARO, we trust Grusch. And so because of that, I'm still very intrigued on why they were like reaching out for potential witnesses. I'm like, you guys are Congress. Like, it's anyone. There's a lot of voices in this. But again, I think that might come down to some of those AARO politics. And quite frankly, the way Grusch was treated like shit after publicly testifying is probably giving some folks who know some stuff proper cold feet. Because like if you got a family, like I'm pretty sure, I think it was Daily Beast who like broke the story about his struggle with PTSD and all that, which was like local court records in Virginia, I believe. And so like this media professor Laslo, I think that was good reporting, but the fact that it came out at that time, I'm pretty sure someone in the intelligence community, like broadly speaking, which to me includes members of congressional staff on the intel committees, as well as, people in ... all the 3-letter acronyms. But I'm pretty sure someone in one of those agencies told the Daily Beast, hey, go look at these records here. Which, whoever did that, and again, I'm pretty 99% convinced that's what went down. Because, yeah, that's just how the government and the media industrial complex work. And, it's good for us in the media when we get that tip. But for this to come in the context of like his struggle with PTSD, like, fuck that. Whoever, and like, yeah, the media, we got to be assholes sometimes. And like, this is new information. We got to put it out there. But who the fuck would think that would shame Grusch? Like, I've struggled with PTSD since after January 6th. Like, this was the start of January 6th. This was the doorstop for the Senate Radio TV Gallery. It was the sharpest thing I could find. So this, at the end of it, was my shank. I'm like, I can take a motherfucker out with that. I also had a wrench from CNN in my other pocket, And so, like, to knock someone for their struggle with PTSD, fuck that. Like, hey, a lot of us struggle with PTSD. That's just normal, y'all. Especially people in the military. And so, like, if anything, like, God bless you more for your service. And then God bless you more for going and testifying publicly, knowing that you could face that bullshit. And so, especially knowing, like, the suicide rate for veterans, the fact that anyone would try to fucking use that as a negative, like, no. Now I just see Grusch as a more fully formed person. He's got struggles like the rest of us. And so, yeah, I get really personally offended by that shit. But I can, again, see that spooking off some of these other folks. And I bet, just from what we know of how the government operates, that was probably the intention, you know, to quiet these whistleblowers who were literally lining up at AARO's door until they were like, wait, we don't trust what's inside AARO's door, which was Kirkpatrick. And so never forget this, right? Before Kirkpatrick left AARO and did his media tour where he's like blah 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 mocking this community, like fuck you, you little fucking nitwit, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. That comes from Professor Laslo of Johns Hopkins. Like, for him to come out and just like shit on all this, bro, you mocking the community, you didn't do your most basic job, which we know because before you resigned, you had a private one-on-one meeting with Senator Gillibrand where she pushed you on whistleblowers. The fact that her office was getting calls from the whistleblowers who didn't trust you and your agency, which was the whole reason they set up you and your agency. And that was then Kirkpatrick had a private meeting with Senator Rounds, who's not even that big in this issue per se. He's the co-author with Schumer for the UAPDA amendment, but like he's very quiet. He's former governor. He's South Dakotan, so he's like the nicest, most genuine guy. For him, like, this is like, you really messed up if this principal is coming to your classroom because you had Rounds go to AARO and sit down with Kirkpatrick and say, hey, you're failing us because, again, these whistleblowers don't trust you. Well, so that's two. Then Kirkpatrick had a private meeting, classified, with mom and dad. Senator Warner, the head of the Intel Committee in the Senate, and Senator Rubio, the vice chair of that committee. They both sat down with Kirkpatrick and said, hey, you are failing. Your agency is failing because the whistleblowers don't trust you. And so for then Kirkpatrick to leave and like write all these fanciful fictional tales, blah, 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 this conspiracy, whatever. Like, no, bro, you're just trying to make a few bucks off of your shameful job. Like, you failed at your most basic duty. So no, you don't get to write the narrative going forward. If anything, every news outlet should just blank your name out. Like, you're not a source for us. You're worthless. And that's where it'll be interesting to see, because I think it was his. Who's the guy in there now?
Tim Phillips. Yeah.
I got questions about him, but he kind of had an intelligence community background, and he kind of got slid into AARO partway through Kirkpatrick's tenure. And so I'm curious if he drank the same. Well, and pardon me. And so are all these whistleblowers. They're curious and asking whether he drank the same Kool-Aid that Kirkpatrick probably laced himself. And so, yeah, AARO, those bastards. And so there was another one interviewing Rubio at the start of this year. He was so frustrated because so I used to always ask him about drug policy and stuff. And he'd be like, are you going to ask me about pot? Now he does that with UFOs. You're going to ask me about UFOs? And I hadn't asked him for a few months. And I was like, sir, I got that UFO question you want. He's like, oh, great. He kind of jokes. Well, then asking him about AARO and Kirkpatrick shitting on him, you get this like beautiful moment of honesty where you get to like see inside the legislative process. And Rubio's like, man, all these questions you're asking me, he's like, that's why we set up AARO. And so it's literally, the Senate especially, but Congress set up AARO so they could outsource their thinking on UFOs, UAPs, because it rose to the level where lawmakers were like, all right, American public, we're hearing from them a lot. We need to like tackle this in some way. Let's set up an agency so that we can like get a little distance from this issue. And Rubio's like, man, I wanted cover. I wanted to just be able to go to this agency, have them do my thinking for me, and for him and his perspective, is like write the issue off. But he's like, they fucking failed at that. So like everything Kirkpatrick was out there saying on this little like, uh, sob tour was bullshit. Because the people who created AARO are like, no, you're a failure, and you not only failed us as lawmakers, you failed these service members and members of the government who are literally crying out for a place for them to, have a repository for the crazy shit that they've seen that they can't explain. And so they've been going to lawmakers' offices very quietly. They don't want to do it over the phones. And so, like, that's where a lot of this chaos and these questions have come from Kirkpatrick's just utter dereliction of duty. And yet he's still quoted by my colleagues in the mainstream media as if he's an expert. No, he's a failure. Fuck that guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned in the senator rounds, and he did recently come out and say that we've got a shot at getting Schumer's new UAPDA included in this year's NDAA, but it depends on House intel. So what's the picture there? Why does it depend so much on House intel?
So this is like the mystery that I've been chasing since last year's NDAA. So we'll see. It's interesting. So like, sorry, I'm gonna be a little long-winded, but que sera, sera. You're like, bro, you're always long-winded. The NDAA has to pass each year because Congress is so derelict. Remember me at the start of this saying Congress just pieced out. They're only going to be in Washington 3 weeks between now and November. And that's, again, 3-day weeks. And so with that, like last year, they kind of had like the fake conference committee where there was just one public meeting where they have to hammer out between the Senate and the House of Representatives. They each pass their separate NDAA bills. Then they have to like meld them together. This is the dirty democracy. That's how it works. And so Rounds this year is kind of saying like he thinks that messed up process might actually help them. Because like last year they had one public meeting and I think it was like they let the press in for 15, 20 minutes. Then they boot us out. And then I was surprised within like an hour because I was like, all right, this is going to go potentially 12 hours. You got staffers who are ready for an all-nighter, buying all their Mountain Dews and Red Bulls and all that stuff. But this just, after an hour, you started seeing like big names walking out, like MTG. I remember talking to her. And she's like, no, this is bullshit. She's like, it's already cooked. Because, and remember, in their defense last year, we did have the historic ousting of the sitting speaker. And so Congress literally ground itself. Instead of shutting the government down, Congress shut Congress down. And so there were 3 weeks where the government was utterly shut down and there's nothing they could do because there was no speaker. And so once that was wrapped up, that condensed everything. And so the funding bills, everything, Speaker Johnson got a pass on a lot of that stuff because of the crazy nature of how he got the gavel. Well, so the NDAA, that was like cooked by leadership. Well, so that's where I've been on a hunt, me and the Askapole army, because I just never gave up on it because I'm like, wait, this UAPDA, the UAP Disclosure Act, the lead sponsor of that is the majority leader of the Senate. That's Chuck Schumer's bill. And I was just asking for a year, who has the power in this building, the Capitol, who has the power to gut to his face the Senate Majority Leader's bill? Like, the Senate Majority Leader's job is to cut you with a knife and gut your proposal. Like LBJ revolutionized that post with those smooth, strong arm tactics. Schumer got LBJ'd. And so that's where I was like hunting down this mystery, because you have over in the House, Jim Himes, the top Democrat on House Intel. Let me start with Armed Services. So the two committees that deal with NDAA is Intel and Armed Services Committee. And the head of Armed Services, the top Republican, who I used to cover for Alabama Public Radio, Mike Rogers, I see him leaving that. I spend a lot of my time in the halls of the Capitol. I say our job is hurry up and wait. So yeah, I waited in that hall like 2-3 hours. And so like finally when the leaders were coming out of there, Rogers had this huge entourage with him. And I just like pop a question in. And you could tell his staff didn't want him answering questions, but he knows me. So he answered, and he goes, because I asked about UAPs and the amendment. I'm like, who's fighting that? And his comment was something like, something, it's on our website, askpoll.com, but it was something like, we think there's redundancies in the amendment, and we're trying to take care of the redundancies, which could mean a lot, but it basically means that someone in the intel community, someone in the military was telling him on Armed Services Committee, like, hey, we don't like how far Schumer in the Senate is going. And hey, a lot of this isn't even needed. So like, that's like, instead of having to argue against it, forcefully, when you say, oh, it's not needed, you kind of come and you can just be flippant. Like, oh, it's redundant. Like, that's already taken care of. Let's just get rid of those 3 pages of it because it's redundant. If it's redundant, like, it doesn't really matter, right? You can print it 5 times. It's like have someone do it. But so they got rid of all the redundancies behind closed doors. Well, so that's Rogers. He was aware of it, but he told me he wasn't the active one. And when we interviewed him this spring and stuff, he said, no, like, it wasn't me. So then the top Democrat on that committee, Armed Services, is Larson, I believe, from Washington State, who I always get his name wrong, but I used to cover him for KUOW, Seattle's NPR station. And where is this? My little handy Facebook. Where is homeboy? So anyway, when I think of his name, when I go up to him and ask about UAP, so again, this is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith of Washington. Yeah. When I ask Adam Smith about it, him in just like this moment of candor is like, what the hell is a UAP? Literally. So that's his honest reaction. And I go, UFOs. And he goes, there's a new name for UFOs? So like, that's his level of engagement. And I don't think he was faking or acting. He was just like, really, Matt? Like, that's crazy. I didn't know that. Because yeah, you don't give a shit about the issue. So I'm pretty sure he wasn't gutting the Senate leader of his own party's amendment on the issue. And so then, Mike Turner, the chair of House Intel, I used to cover him for Dayton, Ohio's NPR station, so he knows me well and used to talk to me in the Capitol. Now that he's like a big Fox News fanboy and Newsmax fanboy, he told me to my face last year, I don't do ambush interviews. Ambush? Motherfucker. The reason I got this quill, this is my quill that wrote, this is my First Amendment. It's my quill that wrote it. I'm like, no, we get the First Amendment. This isn't ambush. Like, you want to be a lawmaker? This is what you have to deal with. And guess what, lawmakers? You have the First Amendment right to not answer my questions, and I have the First Amendment right to ask them all. And so I use it. Turner, he hasn't really engaged on the topic, but what we heard through through Congressman Jim Himes, top Democrat on Intel, and again, like, I've got his cell in my phone. I've covered him for WSHU, Fairfield, Connecticut's NPR station. So like, the reason I know the Newtown families after Sandy Hook is because I covered Congress for that station. So Himes and I have like been at really tearful events. Like, we know each other because we've like gone through tragedies together, and so like he trusts me. Probably I annoy him like a motherfucker, but whatever. That's my job. And he's got his job, but he also respects me. And so he's just like this eternal UFO skeptic. Like whatever AARO says he believes. And he was actually in that first, before this Congress and before the Grusch hearing. Remember, there was that first hearing on UFOs in 50 years, the Congress before. As a part of Intel, Himes was a part of that. And two of the witnesses told him, like, no, like, there's nothing UFOs. So he just quotes that. He's like, these people told it to me. There's nothing there. There's no there. So he's just convinced. So Himes, throughout last year, again, because I know him well and I see him and he talks to me, I would just be like, hey, UAPs. And he's like, I have never had a conversation with Turner on UAPs. He's like, our committee is just not dealing with it at all. That has always stood out to me because he's so indifferent to the issue. It's always felt to me like that could either mean, yeah, at face value, the House Intel Committee doesn't give a shit about this issue now that Adam Schiff is gone. Because Adam Schiff, when he was, he's going to likely be California's next Democratic senator. When he was the chair of that committee, that's where we had the first UFO hearing in 50 years because he cared about the issue and he's got questions. He's a California lawmaker, Southern California. That's where a ton of these sightings have happened. Well, so I was like, all right, this could just be post-Schiff era. The Intel committee just said, all right, fuck him and his legacy issues. We don't give a shit about this. But so now, to take this full circle, to have Senator Rounds. So let me finish that thought. So if Himes doesn't give a shit about it, that means it could really just empower Turner to handle everything UAP related on his own. And because your counterpart, the top Dem on your committee, doesn't think there's a there. Like Himes usually just like laughs off the issue. Like, why are you even asking me about this? So he doesn't give a shit about it. And he kind of feels like it's a waste of his time to even engage. So if that's his thinking, well, you might have just made Mike Turner and whoever is in back of Turner, whether funding him or people in the government who their interests come through the intelligence committee, whether that's Pentagon, whether that's CIA, NSA, whoever, Department of Energy, all of them. That could mean that Turner's really empowered, which if Turner's really empowered on his own, that could mean one of his staff members is really empowered because Turner doesn't seem to really care about the issue. So one of his staffers could be really empowered. Or whoever's in back of Turner, whether it's a funder, all these military industrial complex contractors give him a lot of money. So whether it's one of them or whether it's, again, these government, top people at the Pentagon, whatever, he's chummy with all these folks now that he's got like nice suits that are fitted, which he did not have a decade ago when I knew him as an Ohio boy. And so for Senator Rounds, and again, throughout this year, Busted Ask Poll went and continuously, at least once a month, we would ask someone about who gutted Chuck Schumer's amendment in last year's NDAA. And again, Rogers, Himes, all of them, they said, no, it wasn't us. And we don't even know who did it, which I'm like, all right, so you're all derelict of duty. Senate, they were mum on it. And remember the iteration of it last year, there were 6 co-sponsors to make it like super bipartisan. Schumer and Rounds were the two who, them and their offices were the two who negotiated it. The others didn't really negotiate it, but to give cover for the issue, they made it broadly bipartisan. So on the Republican side, you had Rounds, Rubio, and then Todd Young of Indiana, Republican. He told me this year, I haven't published it yet on Ask a Poll, but it's going to come out maybe tonight now that I remember about it. But he said no, he wasn't a part of the talks at all. He's not sure why he's not on the amendment this year, because it's kind of just with Schumer and Rounds. So then on the Dem side last year, you had Schumer, then Gillibrand, and then New Mexico Senator Martin Heinrich. Again, those other four said they weren't a part of negotiations. They just signed on to it. So they weren't really informed on it. So they're not the ones gutting it or really advocating for it. But so no one was really informed. So finally, after a freaking year, Rounds let slip that House Intel seems to be the ones who care about this issue, which again, that makes my mind instantly go, well, what is House Intel? House Intel on one level is just the committee, but the committee is its two leaders. And so if Himes doesn't give a shit about the issue, and this is literally where I've invited Himes on Ask a Poll very publicly, because I'm like, all right, this means one of two things. Because again, Senator Mike Rounds is like the most gentle, nice Midwestern guy who I don't think he could lie if he tried. Like he's scarily trustworthy, which makes me actually think he might be a serial killer. But same with Tim Kaine and Cory Booker. I'm like, you guys are all too genuine and nice. Like, no, you all got skeletons somewhere. But anyway, Senator Rounds, he was at the table on this issue. Again, he went to AARO, pressured Kirkpatrick. He says it's House Intel. So that makes it seem like, so yeah, Himes is either lying to my face and lying to your faces, viewers here and subscribers at Ask a Poll. He's either lying to all of our faces or he's been completely cut out of the loop. So if House Intel cares about this issue, that doesn't mean Himes, according to what we know. And so my call to Congressman Himes, ranking Democrat on House Intel, Hipsky, is, all right, so you now have a senior senator saying you're full of shit. So either find out what Turner has been doing on UAPs, find out what's happening on this topic under your name, because Congressman, they're not saying that Republicans on House Intel are doing this. They're saying House Intel. So that's you. So your fingerprints are on whatever comes out of it. So again, either he lied or he's completely derelict and he's allowing his committee that, if Democrats win in November and recapture control of the House, Himes becomes chairman. And so on that day you become chair, are you going to allow your committee to have an active functioning investigation, an active functioning arm that is gutting the Senate Majority Leader's own UAP amendment that you don't even know about? So, again, either he's a fucking liar or he's 100% derelict of duty. Because even if you don't give a shit about it, Congressman, I know your constituents do. I know many veterans do. Many active duty service members do. So as much as you just write it off, no, we're way beyond that. And when I've asked that motherfucker about what all these senators have told us, the steady intrusion of U.S. airspace by, the unmanned aerial vehicles. What is the drone acronym? Like unmanned. I asked him about UAVs, and he goes, "What is a UAV?" Go listen to it. We have all the audio on askapol.com. Listen for yourself. He literally says, "What's a UAV?" I'm like, Congressman, you're the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, and here your counterparts in the Senate, who are members of the same committee, are publicly pushing the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the one who I forgot. Senator Kelly was pushing the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on this issue, that the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is like, yeah, it's a problem, but I got to talk about it in a classified setting. Same with the heads of Northcom and Southcom when Tim Kaine asked them about it. And you, again, they use the terminology drones. That's what Kelly and Kane, they're like, we're getting the steady intrusion of drones or UAVs, and you don't even know what that acronym is? And like, Himes, like, yeah, there's way too many dumb acronyms used in government and especially in Washington. But he didn't come at it from like, oh, yeah, I know that. Once I explained it to him, he's like, yeah, I just haven't heard that. What the fuck do you do? Like, you are the congressman from Wall Street. Like, he was not JP Morgan Chase. He was one of those huge hedge funds. And like his claim to fame when he first ran for Congress in 2006, which is when I started covering Congress. So I've been here as long as, no, I've been here before you, sir, because you got here, you got seated in 2007. I've been here since 06, bro. Well, his claim to fame was like running from his hedge fund in downtown New York after the World Trade Center, after the Twin Towers collapsed. He ran back home to Connecticut, and that was kind of his 9/11 hero story and how he won. So we know he's like a part of the moneyed class, and he's Connecticut, which it's always made me laugh covering the Connecticut delegation because they're like pretty anti-war, very progressive, but oh my God, do they love the military-industrial complex? Like, you try to take a penny away from Sikorsky, or if you try to like give a contract to another one, like those Connecticut knives come out and they're sharp. And so like Himes, he knows about this stuff, or he should, because literally you're surrounded by the people who are talking about this. And the Senate Majority Leader of your own party is pushing it. So like, yeah, I've got a couple conversations I need to have with Mr. Himes, which keep an eye on my our Ask a Poll Twitter account, because either he's coming on and doing a live session with me, or you're going to hear some pretty fiery audio next time I see him.
Before I let you go, Matt, please let everybody know how they can keep up with you, askapol.com, and what you offer them there.
Yeah, come, water's warm. I think we're about like 4,000 subscribers. Free, most of them are free, but you can also, there's a paid tier if you support our work. Because literally, what was it? This is where I get kind of geeked out about what we're doing. When our last interview with Moskowitz, he, like literally 2 minutes before the interview, I had just interviewed Luna. So I go up to Moskowitz and I ask him like, hey, this next UAP hearing. And he goes, hey, you got to ask Luna. And I'm like, no, sir. She just said it's happening after August. So I broke the news of the next UAP hearing to a member of the UAP caucus. So if you support the press corps, the independent press corps, keeping Congress abreast and keeping up on these lying assholes, whether it's Himes or whoever, the mystery of who gutted Schumer's amendment, which again, we've followed up on at least once a month since last year's NDAA. Like, the reason lawmakers kind of love me and kind of fear me is because they know I have a memory and they know I read. And like, unlike my colleagues in the press corps, who some of them do amazing work, but some do shit work. And hey, I've done my share of shit work, but que sera, sera. Like, they move on. And so like after, you remember all the media attention for the balloon at the start of last year? There's been no follow-up on that. They come for the Grusch hearing, there's 1,000 cameras there. Only Ask a Poll and News Nation at the next SCIF briefing. A lot more came to the next one because they heard the message from you all in the community. So yeah, if you support us at askapol.com, and yeah, let's keep the pressure up on these lying, lazy ...
Yeah, I hear that, brother. Well, listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on everything. And I do look forward to seeing, if we get any hearings, how you're going to cover that and ask them questions. So everyone, go to askapol.com and help support Matt.
You know my style. If they have a hearing, I'm gonna be in the hallway. I'm gonna be listening to it on C-SPAN, but I'm in the hallway and I just wait for the lawmakers to leave. And that's where I get our exclusives for our Ask a Poll audience.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Appreciate you, brother.
Anytime, man. And let's again speak soon. All the best to everyone watching as well. Thank you for watching as always. And we will see you again on the next one. Take care and goodbye.